Then God reached out and took the light in his hand. God rolled the light around in his hands until he made the sun, and he set that sun ablazing in the heavens. And the light that was left from making the sun, God gathered it up in a shining ball, spangling the night with the moon and the stars. Then down between the darkness and the light, he hurled the world. And God said, "That's good." Then God himself stepped down, and the sun was on his right hand, and the moon was on his left. The stars were clustered about his head, and the earth was under his feet. And God walked, and where he trod, his footsteps hollowed the valleys out and bulged the mountains up. But then he stopped and looked and saw that the earth was hot and barren. So God stepped over the edge of the world and spat out the seven seas. He batted his eye, and the lightning flashed. He clapped his hands, and the thunders rolled. Waters above the earth came down. The cooling waters came down. Those were the poetic words of biogenesis inspired by the Abrahamic account of creation from the colorful and artistic imagination of an American Negro, James Weldon Johnson, an attorney by profession in America of the 1920s. And he wrote a little on the side. That came from God's Trombone, around 1927, which, as we are told, and also often reminded, was not a particularly good time for these colored people in America. But even at that time, at least according to one Negro preacher, Reverend Samuel DeWitt Proctor, who was just being born around that time down in the Tidewater of Norfolk, Virginia, and who went on from there to do many, many great things, determined to be an optimist, even if he was the last optimist alive in the entire world. But even Reverend Sam Proctor says that back in those days, even for simple folks living just above the scratch line, and didn't realize that they were poor, so far down that even down looked up. As one Negro from Birmingham, Alabama once said to me in college, down in the beautiful Shenandoah Valley, if they had nothing else that they could hold on to, they held a strong and abiding faith in a God of their weariest, a God of their silent tears, a God who had brought them thus far on their way, who had by his might led them into the light, and for which they aspired in deep Christian devotion to keep them forever in the path they prayed. Or at least so was the thought of a Negro attorney, James Johnson, the poet, who had set that poem to some music that his brother, a school teacher in a segregated schoolhouse, wrote. One of the few provided for his people back in those olden days, even in A Virginia for Lovers. And who would ever imagine that that song, sung in segregated schoolhouses today, would be an anthem sung at the beginning of football sports games, with words of that song lost to time. But at least in those days, if you were to ask a fellow what the devil looked like, he might say it was the image of the Ku Klux Klan, as my father did, as he peered out the window of his parsonage home as a small child, growing up just across the state line, just south of Danville, Virginia. Or he might say, as did the Negro character Troy Maxon in August Wilson's Fences, as portrayed by the A-list Negro actor Denzel Washington, who I had the opportunity to see perform on Broadway, that the devil, standing there bigger than life, was the white man. But not just any old white man, but the devil, a word mentioned at least 22 times in the screenplay, who he had the occasion to meet one day, and who had sold him on a nice furniture set for him and his family to enjoy, upon which he was still paying interest installments 15 years later, paying for that old furniture set 10 times over, like he had lost his soul, and he knew it. But there was anything he could do about it. It simply is what it is, a defeatism. Yet, while the devil referenced 22 times in the August Wilson play mostly refers to Troy Maxon's encounter with the man who had made him sell his soul for a piece of junk that wasn't worth the price over the long run. But also, he is mentioned by his brother Gabriel, a veteran who was messed up in the war and who believed with his silent trumpet that the devil was strong, and as he said, wasn't no pushover, in that wonderful vernacular. And at only one point for Troy Maxon is there a nuanced interpretation regarding another devil that he had met and had a relationship with in his life, and subject to various interpretations when you really consider it. And Troy Maxon says, now it was my turn to run him off. I picked him up them same reins that he had used on me. I picked up them reins and commenced a whooping on him. The gal jumped up and run off. And when my daddy turned to face me, I could see why the devil had never come to get him. Because he was the devil himself. But we began this video series in what may at least be described as a liberal construction of an account of a notable scientist, Richard Feynman, an astrophysicist from the prestigious Harvard University, in one of his rather popular works, in which he attempted to extend his market brand beyond the disciplines of the sciences for which he was a noted authority to other aspects of life. Ordinary common life, in a book appropriately titled Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman. And we had focused our crudely crafted lens upon one particular vignette to which one might give the title in an expansive reading, The Devil and Dick Feynman. An encounter that he, a scientist of impeccable credentials, had somewhere in the vicinity of Sin City, Las Vegas, with a wily Mephistophelian character presenting a Faustian deception even upon approach, who had tempted him while he had been found lying by the waters of the pool. He had been found lying by the waters of the pool at a modest motel, not a hotel, probably one of the few fine amenities offered at that lodging establishment back in those days, besides maybe an air conditioner, a color television to watch the local stations, an ice bucket, an ice machine down the hall, outside, with vending machines, and maybe if a really, really fancy motel, even a vibrating bed, to seduce him to take a little plunge in some unfamiliar waters way over his head, tempted by the allure of the life of leisure that this serpentine character by the pool had offered, and assured him that he had himself, even if not at least from the account, appearing to be enjoying this assumed opulence at a location like the Venetian or the Bellagio, or in those days, perhaps the Flamingo, which should have provided some immediate signs of danger. He might await further out on that invitation to hop aboard this luxury cruise ship. Any kid growing up in far-off Rockaway Beach should be familiar with the New York Lotto commercial. Remember to bet with your head, not over it, at one of our fine, convenient locations near you. Because to win it, you gotta be in it. And you look like a winner. Hello, my name is Benjamin Mike Webb, and at least indirectly as a retired member of the intelligence community recently, well, the President and the United States Supreme Court have tasked me to report on a truly fascinating phenomenon which may be of great interest with as many as 3 in 10 Americans by December identifying themselves as nuns, not affiliated with any faith denomination at all. Up 6 points since the pre-pandemic estimate that had already found their numbers exceeding those affiliated with the Roman Catholic Church, which still remains the largest formal faith denomination. And in a community like Arlington, Virginia, that is the home of the most government scientists, with 75.3% of age-eligible residents holding at least a bachelor's degree, but where, according to Best Places, only 32.8% of the people in Arlington are religious. Revisiting the battlefield of the 1925 Scopes monkey trial that had pitted Darwinian evolution against biblical creation theory is most certainly what may be fairly described as a formidable challenge, a David versus Goliath contest. Goliath, of whom the Israelites were so afraid, but certainly a timely one after what has been described as a purely science matter that has most adversely impacted the community of faith. it may be a timely opportunity to examine the relevance of faith in a modern post-pandemic aftermath of a two-year period during which many places of worship, in the face of a public health crisis, science of unprecedented magnitude, had even declared themselves non-essential, while according to the Pew Research Center, as many as 38% of the clergy have, over the course of this raging tide of infection, considered throwing the towel in themselves. And so, grab a towel. Where do we begin this seafaring journey? This time, a daunting task even today for fishermen and sailors shoving off to the deep. As much as it was for the ancients, fearing monsters, tempests, squalls, Scylla and Charybdis, things that we today would say were their imagination. A very natural apprehension whenever mortal man is confronted with that which is unknown, giving rise to at least some evolutionary pressure, the necessity for a quantum of faith to overcome. It will only summon the courage to persevere any further, or as Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. has described it, ascending a staircase without the ability to see with sight the next highest step, providing a substance of things hoped for and an evidence of things unseen. Now, there is probably some aspiring STEM graduate who had watched the last video installment and can already explain point by point what is the problem with the water in the evolutionary Big Bang Theory story of biogenetic events occurring approximately 4.5 billion years ago, involving a mass of hot gases swirling around the coldness of space, shaping into orbs, which is their proclivity. They tend to become circles, attracted by gravity, with a large star being born at the center of an inchoate solar system of what used to be 9, plus a possible planet X beyond that until 2006, when the planet Pluto became disqualified for being too small in mass. And there are probably some older Americans who missed that big news story. And eventually, at least 205 moons in orbit around only 6 of the planets, with moons tending to mass the further out you get from the sun. Figure that out. Just think about it. Do the science. Are you getting warmer or colder, as we used to say in grammar school? If you saw the Tom Hanks film, Apollo 13, when they announced Houston, we have a problem, and Ed Harris had to resolve that no American had ever died in space and had to, at least not on his watch, making failure not an option and prompting a sharp, swift order to work the problem in. You know that when power goes out on the lunar module being used as a life raft, it tends to get pretty cold in space, or about 455 degrees Fahrenheit, or for the science-minded, 2.7 degrees Kelvin. And what happens to water at exactly 32 degrees, or 0 degrees Celsius in the metric system? It becomes solid, ice, solid as a rock. And so now, imagine a giant ice asteroid breaking the atmosphere of some large forming spherical mass attracted by its gravitational force. More attractive than Dick Lyman to Las Vegas. And it begins the first encounter friction that necessitates the heat shield that Commander John Lovell thought might be broken upon his reentry, and that had the folks at NASA so concerned. It's going to reach in the Earth's atmosphere and began to perform some physics equations without any, calculation. Like weight minus drag over mass, which equals what? Acceleration. It's going to start getting faster and faster. And if you don't know these equations, you have not taken the elective course in high school. And many don't. And we know, as the folks at NASA have posted on their terminal velocity landing page, that you don't have to join Galileo Galilei dropping cannonballs from the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And if you don't know that story, don't even worry about it anymore, because in big red letters with all the neat mathematical equations you have to remember in a high school physics class, in big red letters with emphatic underscored words for our visual learners, objects do not fall at the same rate through the atmosphere. And kids in the advanced class can explain exactly why, depending upon greater weight, a lower drag coefficient or streamlining, lower gas density, which occurs at higher altitudes where gases are engaging in social distance, not so much because they don't want to catch COVID-19, but because, forget it, and or smaller area, reducing frictional impact drag. I know they're not running around in dresses, men clouds running under. No, it's not happening. And for those confused by why aerosols and droplets take on different characteristics in computational field dynamics, call in GCMAR in Virginia Tech. Or just think about why cannonball might fall faster than a feather from the Empire State Building, where we import an additional variable of vectors or wind current. It can get pretty windy up there, which probably will not be that significant for the cannonball, unless it has a very, very windy day, or unless it has a habit and gown like Sally Field in the Flying Up. And if by providence you are Sister Catrill, perhaps you have spent so much time on Juan Carlos's private jet that you have mastered aileron and directional controls and can just glide right down to Cape Canaveral or the shuttle landing strip at Edwards Air Force Base. In California, we have the test facility for the space shuttle. And maybe pop by Richard Feynman's house for an ice-cold glass of water to discuss O-rings and their problems on the space shuttle Challenger. But not even most nuns enjoy that kind of love. And a person's body is about 75% water, which has a boiling point of what? 100 degrees Celsius. That's why they use the 100. Or 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And whatever the temperature that paper burns, think of the book. Okay, don't even worry about it. And for a person of about 6 feet, who we can call Frosty the Meteorite Snowman, is gonna hit a terminal velocity, can't go any faster, can't touch this anymore, of about 66 meters per second, or 148 miles per hour, but is gonna fall for 10,000 meters, or 6,214 miles, and fall for about 41 minutes, which is a long time to be thinking about, oh no, I'm gonna hit the ground. But he's not gonna have to worry about that, because he's Frosty Snowman. And while Frosty heats up over the boiling point, the cooling gases below are going to what? They're also going to be providing some little bit of heat. But, okay, at least in the Negro James Weldon Johnson poetic account, inspired by the Abrahamic biogenetic narrative, with his colorfully vivid imagination, he envisioned that the earth was hot and barren. So God stepped over the edge of the world, and he spat out the 7 seas. I'm not saying that did not occur, but that may have been his artistic interpretation. Bring his character to the role after applying his Stanislavski method to the problem. But he also says that God batted his eyes, and the lightning collapsed. He clapped his hands, and the thunders rolled, and the waters above the earth came down. The cooling waters came down. Now just imagine this, the water comes somehow, evaporates, and so now we have what? They're up there in the sky. And if we just consider the 96.5% of the Earth's water that are contained in the oceans, with an average depth of about 3,700 meters, or 12,100 feet. And a modern submarine has a crushed depth, or more correctly, a collapsed depth of 730 meters. We had an incident not too long ago. Or 2,400 feet. About 65% of that total depth. So it doesn't even get all the way down there before it starts to crush. Plus, just like the solid mass of water is going to evaporate. Can't make it. Plus, the Marianas Trench, which we all know, deepest place on the earth, near the territorial island of Guam, a familiar place in pandemic, which is about 11,000 meters, or 36,200 feet. And that is a lot of rainfall of Noah and the Ark proportion. Grab a couple of animals. No, they haven't been invented yet. And most people don't believe that great flood, the great deluge, happened. And this is antediluvian. Big, big word. Remember, antediluvian, before the flood. But if you were to be a big guy, big as maybe God, or the devil, I don't know, he might be big. He's big in, like, Dante's Inferno. Gigantic. He's like right there at the tunnel of hell. And like he did, with the light forming a great ball to herald it, spangling the moon and the night with the stars, using all of the fresh water and not the salt water in the world. The U.S. Geological Service has estimated that huge water ball of fresh water would be 860 miles in diameter, filled with 332,500,000 cubic meters of water. Whoa! Enough to make the Negro singer Ray Charles think about a rainy night in Georgia and say, Lord, I believe it's raining all over the world. But if you think about it, using the science, that would really not be a lot of water. You may think it's raining all over the world, but no, it's only 860 miles in diameter. Water. Remember that our personal perceptions of science, especially in pandemic, may not align with the reality of science, especially in pandemic. And the folks, the scientists at the U.S. Geological Service have actually performed some remarkable calculations already for you that might make you reconsider the next time you find yourself standing below a cumulus cloud. And just a single cumulus cloud floating above your head, gingerly, and measuring just 1 cubic kilometer in size. It's not really that large. Weighs actually about 551 tons, which is probably heavier than your car. I'm willing to bet it's heavier than your car. Floating in the sky, and would actually contain more water than all of the fresh water in the entire world. Or 1 billion cubic meters of water. And how many of these clouds, at least 1 cubic kilometer in size, have you seen? And now add that to the oceans and everything else that is water in the world that would have to be in the sky. Talk about a cloudy day. And yes, Dr. Climate, right now I believe we could all use nice cold glass of water. So let's pause here. But next time, let's cast off to swim with the sharks in the deep waters beyond the safe harbors of nearby shore. And maybe even rock the faith of those without any faith at all, just on the topic of water in our scientific immersion program. And be sure to join us in baptism and fellowship through communion, drinking the deep gulps gushing like rushing waters and mighty streams through those plank boards of this seagoing vessel. A simulated drowning experience, like on a waterboard. In the next video, as we discuss more of these topics regarding the creation theory and being a winner at the big casino. And a story about a 1 in a trillion or more chance bet in a lifetime that was won nonetheless at the Big Blue Marble Casino, just relying on sheer luck and serendipity, with no choices consciously performed at all, or so they say. But yet, which apparently mankind cannot do, even with the best technology in science and medicine during a pandemic visited by a virus that isn't stupid, according to Dr. Walensky, and she went to medical school. And that little virus conquered the world without even a sentient thought. And you know what? You look like a winner. This briefing is unclassified, as you will. My name is Mason Blackman, and by God, I am one of the gods. This year, resolve to do the right thing, and we shall make America great again. Honest. Carry on. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb. Thunk, I could have had a vaccine.